When I heard the learned astronomer, when I heard the learned astronomer, when the proofs, the figures were ranged in columns before me, when I was shown the charts and diagrams to add, divide, and measure them, when I, sitting, heard the astronomer where he lectured with much applause in the lecture room, how soon unaccountable I became tired and sick. Till rising and gliding out, I wandered off by myself in a mystical, moist night air, and from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars.
Oh,
Well
excellent.
done.
Yep.
Yes, I also included Edgar Allan Poe's sonnet to science, because that is poem that always comes to my mind when I read Walt Whitman's poem about the astronomer. Uh, Usually, I get some criticism because that's not part of ModPo. Poe isn't modern enough. My suggestion is we simply refer to it if we have some ideas that goes with it. Yes, what do you make with the learned astronomer? Actually, with the speaker attending that lecture.
Because you sent this out in this grouping where we were going to be talking about Dickinson's loneliness,
Okay. Yeah.
and because I had been stuck on the non-quantifiability, when I heard the learned astronomer, I was thinking about how the learned astronomer was listing all of these measurable things and and these numbers and all these things one can measure, but then all that mattered was the non-measurable, just looking up at the stars. So I thought it tied in really well.
Isn't it typical for Whitman
Yes,
making own experiences?
but he always lists so much. And I think because I had the Dickinson on the brain, that it just seemed such a nice parallel with what she was doing about quantifiable things of value or not of value, and things of value that you can't count.
It's actually unintentional. um,
Maybe it was subconsciously.
and I hadn't thought of what could I group aligned to Emily Dickinson.
The poem really annoyed me.
Emily Dickinson and so first part Emily Dickinson and second part Walt Whitman. But you're completely right. Walt Whitman or the speaker, Walt Whitman, he is alone on a field looking up to the stars, feeling another loneliness.
It really annoyed me, this poem. I studied physics in university, and it's this false there's this weird idea that if you think that something is nice or lovely, that you're not supposed to understand it, that knowing more about it takes away from the beauty or something like that. And that is, if that was true, why are we here trying to understand poetry, right? It's the same thing. If you look as an astronomer to the stars, you still think they're beautiful. If you look with some in an intellectual way to a poem, it's still beautiful. It's the way he rushes out because he loves stars too much to hear what they are. Horrible.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Jeroen. I mean
Yes.
that
Yes.
I was surprised at how much this poem anticipates into some or resembles and perhaps to some degree anticipates a current like anti-science discourse. that we have
Yes.
in the 21st century. That's a huge part of, you know, the culture wars that are sort of sweeping the globe. That there's this whole like, you know, Whitman is like, oh, science is like, we don't need it. I can just go, you know, like my own experience, my own truth is more important than what you come up with all your fancy graphs and figures. Yeah, I thought it was really interesting, and in some ways, I think it's a very like in the longer, you know, history of literature, it's a very anti-modernist stance, because I actually think that like the modernists, you know, the high modernists that we'll encounter, especially in the coming weeks of the class, and that we were already familiar with to some extent, they're actually like really into science. You know, like even if they're not like, even if it's not really reflect. I mean, like Gertrude Stein like went to medical school. You know, like they're actually really into like they like scientific progress is interesting to them, and it actually opens new possibilities for art and literature, and it's not something necessarily to be resisted. So I think here with Whitman, you have this kind of like, you have this specious, you know, opposition that's being made or set up here, right? Like poetry versus science, which actually kind of falls apart for a while in the 20th century and then kind of comes back now in the 21st century. I think it's, so I thought it was a really interesting, you know, I had read this before, but of course I hadn't quite thought of it in those terms, as I did, you know, preparing for today.
I read an article about him being very superficially interested in the transcendentalism and stuff like that. So the article made out him to be like not very deeply interested. So I think this poem is like something like that. He has kind of just grouped the two, his feeling about the romantic feeling for transcendentalism into this, and I don't think he has thought it through. But because then you also think about him as the person who's you know, who's talking about all the expansion, the Western colonial expansion, that comes with technology, with science, right?
That's true.
So did anyone else think about Zeno's paradox?
Huh?
I think I was a little more, I didn't realize quite how negative he was being about science when at first blush. And so I was thinking more about Zeno's paradox, in that you can sit and you can discuss and try to figure something out, but at some point you can just walk across the room. And did anyone else have that reaction?
Oh, right. No, but it's
we mentioned.
So I wasn't as negative about it. I didn't read it as quite as anti-science, because that's what I was thinking about.
More like the fastest way of getting to stars is just walking out.
Yes.
But there's a line there, Suzanne. He says, "How soon unaccountable I became tired and sick." I mean, there is a negative line there directly.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I think that line made me not think about that, because I think generally, Suzanne, I agree with you that it doesn't have to be that negative if that one line wasn't there. And I think actually the last part, something bothers me about it being too perfect, like the use of the word perfect silence, looking at the stars. That seems a bit too good to be true. Like even Whitman would know that there's no, why would there be perfect silence looking at the stars? Is it just him juxtaposing the silence with like the too much applause in the lecture room? Is it just saying, well, I would very much prefer the silence? But I mean, I'm not sure if that's good enough reason for it to be in perfect silence. Just I can't really take it seriously as like wish for this, just looking at the stars.
You know, there's something that I read this poem to my poetry guys on Tuesday, and one person, well, we only had like 2 minutes to go. It was right. And I said, well, I've got a short one from Whitman. And they said, did he ever write a short one?
Yeah. Hey, and the negativity, it could be also not a negativity about science, but an actual, could we say, Whitman's way of being humble, that it was he that was sick. He wasn't able to comprehend. So he doesn't, it's not that science is bad. It's not good. He couldn't get it anymore. It was a lack on his part.
Is it really a problem with comprehension, with understanding?
Yeah, that he has a problem with comprehension. He got sick. He became tired and sick. So this is all fine and all that, but he wasn't able, he couldn't take any more of that in. And, so it's not that science is bad necessarily, because this is the line we say makes it's a negative reaction to the lecture, but he's never humble. So this is his humbleness saying, I got sick of this.
Yeah, and it was unaccountable.
Yeah.
He had no reason to. Yeah.
I remember.
Yeah,
That's a nice idea. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Somewhere that Whitman loved going to these lectures, and lectures were quite popular in these days. Raphael Emerson is famous for his many lectures that he gave. I don't think it's about understanding or comprehension. I also included the Poe poem, and here Poe complains that the scientists stole mythology. You also have that in a Whitman poem. In the mystical, moist night air, it's mystical. This mysteriousness of the world. I think that is what is important for the poet. And when the scientist comes and explains what that is, they destroy the world.
That's what I feel about the Whitman. Exactly what I feel about the Whitman.
What exactly?
Well, when the scientist comes along, they destroy the natural appreciation of the natural world. That to me, I mean, I don't know what you said while I was getting off the train and coming home. But I mean, to me, he's saying for him, he doesn't want to know what the astronomers has discovered. He wants to just be out there and look up at the night air.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think
mystery.
William Wordsworth, who argued about Newton, who destroyed the rainbow. In former times, the rainbow was a sign that the union of God with mankind. And then Newton came and explained, no, it's reflection of light in water. Or in the Poe poem, science, true daughter of old time, thou art, who alterest all things with thy peering eyes. Why praise thou thus upon the poet's heart? Vulture, whose wings are dull realities, you give realities. You destroy everything. That's what he's saying here. How should he love thee? Or how deem thee wise, who wouldst not leave him in his wandering to seek for treasure in the jeweled skies? The jeweled skies, when you look up at this night sky, you do not see stars, you see jewels. I bet he thought with an undaunted wing, hast thou not tracked Diana from the car? And then he goes on. If you think about the planets, they have names like Venus, Mars. They used to be Roman gods, and nowadays these are planets and no gods anymore. Mythology has gone. Science destroys myths and mythology.
Just as Whitman was not writing a sonnet. Just as Whitman changed the whole verse of poetry.
Okay, poet, that's a sonnet. What's a sonnet? A sonnet is 40 lines. Okay, everybody knows that. But also a love poem, and he questions this love for mythology.
Mark, and the second line, it's very interesting because you said Poe was not modern, but this is like quantum physics. Science, who altereth all things with thy peering eyes. Is that the idea that quantumly you change when you observe?
Yes.
And that's very modern. I mean, modern now, modern. compared to Poe. He said, who alters all things with thy peering eyes. That's what he's telling science. You alter all things. But still, it's very modern. I mean, the idea.
He was the first to propose that, Poe. Poe proposed that. What is it, Jeroen? Which theory?
The act of observing.
The act of observing changes the experiment?
Yes.
Schrodinger?
Mm.
He got it from Poe.
That's true, but still, it's very interesting. The line is very, very interesting.
Harry, you indicated that Whitman did not write a sonnet. He has this free verse. Have you all noticed how he structures the poem? When he's talking about the astronomer, he has anaphoras, an effort to have form for the poem, and then he moves out and he forgets about form. He doesn't use these anaphoras anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You really have a turn when he goes out.
I was thinking about that as well because I think the way that he describes the astronomer or like scientists in general, they are very structured, they're ordered, they do everything in columns, they have charts and diagrams, and there's no room for expression. And then when he walks out the lecture room and he's rejecting everything they're doing or saying by just leaving, he also leaves the form behind and leaves the anaphoras and just starts doing everything as he wants it to be, which I mean is very Whitmanian, maybe just the chaos, embracing that, and maybe embracing individuality as well, which then might be a bit more modern.
Yes, but also anaphoras and these long catalogs, and he also has this catalog what the astronomer does, but different form, different style. Yes.
And what do you mean by an anaphora?
Anaphora when lines start with the same word. Here you have when I.
All the whens.
Okay. And then this wandered, learned, looked. That's a American dialect, and it's those contractions did not come into. We don't use those contractions. Looked, learned, we spell it out. We put the E in there. We don't bother with that contraction. But it's definitely American dialect. When I heard the learned astronomer, when the, looked, it's looked, wow.
Oh, it's poetic diction. Also, the British have that in the poetry.
Yeah.
The line, why prayest thou thus upon the poet's heart, that I think goes back to the other poem. I think it's both the poems are talking about how poets view nature differently from scientists. Why prayest thou thus upon the poet's heart? That's in the Poe poem.
And it's also interesting that he has these long lines for the first 4 lines, then this turn, and the lines get shorter.
Yeah, so, the lines get longer. The way, yeah, that's interesting. It's almost this like escalation, this like irritation, right? That's. I heard this guy, and then he was doing this, and then he was doing this and this and this, and then it got to the point where he was doing all this, and I just had to go.
And it made me totally sick. I had to leave the room.
Yeah, I was ill.
Yeah, so the moist night air is almost like a wet blanket to feel better.
Yeah. Like a wet towel.
Yeah, there's the phrase wet blanket is to throw a wet blanket on someone's.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good, Jeroen. That's really good.
That's nice, yeah.
Because the wet towel is a cold compress. Yeah, which is scientific. A compress.
Hey, I have to go. It was great. See you in Woodin. 3 weeks? 2 weeks?
2, 3,
The next time.
3 weeks.
Okay.
3 weeks.
Have a great.
Bye.
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 Yeah, 3 weeks. I just had to double check that.
Oh, Stanley wrote, "The world is full of magic things."
Patiently waiting our senses to grow sharper.
Mark, could you
Yep.
go on the long line? The idea musically that shows how tired he gets from listening to da 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 da, and then is that what you meant when you talk about the long line? It's imitating his take on what's being heard. You see, he heard a droning, 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 droning. The long line.
I like that.
You see?
But yeah, I was only structuring the poem and seeing you have these long lines, and then starting with how soon you have shorter lines. That was what I was saying. But you're completely right. Yes.
Yeah, so the shorter lines of freedom from the droning.
Mm.
Yeah, it's good. I like that.
I liked your reading earlier, Unia, of the perfect here in the last line, or just the way that these last lines kind of like unfurl this this insistence on perfection, as though he's sort of like nailed it here, right? He's kind of like, he's like, yeah, you know, and this is what I did, and it was so perfect, and yeah, there's something that's kind of like unflattering, or it doesn't feel like the same kind of gesture of openness that we encounter in Dickinson, for example. The Dickinson poem we just read, right, where like the words seem to like, I don't know, the words seem to constantly be like reaching beyond the poem, and hear these, you know, even the mystical moist night air, like, you know, and in some ways this is where we get this sort of Dickinson Whitman division, like the mystical moist night. I don't get the sense that that's open, that's actually like, it's not asking us to really like reckon with it. It's kind of like, it's like, oh yeah, the air outside the lecture room was better, because it wasn't full of like astronomers talking, so I liked it better, so it was mystical and it was like refreshing, and then like it was all perfect and it was great, and there's all this like evaluation, like a evaluative language that like creeps in, that I find kind of I don't know, it's part of what makes it home to read.
Whitman's at his best when he's not so
Preachy,
judgmental.
yeah,
What'd you say?
Preachy or judgmental. Like he wants to bring a point across here. I think he really, and I mean a specific, you know, point, like in content, right? He's like, yeah, you know, science is fine or whatever, but it's not the same as just like gazing at the stars by yourself, and that's sort of the point that he wants to make. And he comes off a little judgmental in the process.
Yeah, I think that's also why, because I was thinking, Terry, when you said earlier, maybe he's looking at the lecture and it's kind of like, well, this is overwhelming for me. I just can't understand them. I just have to leave. And I think because the last lines seem so weird with this insistence on perfection, it kind of seems to me like that could not be the case. Not only because of the sick and tired, but just because of the focus on the myself. But I did the right thing. I went outside and I looked at the stars. Whereas you stayed inside with all the clapping and all the noise and just the talk and no practical things. Yeah, but I think it's kind of in the text. It's so much in between the lines and just kind of the feeling of the last kind of three.
Is there any way you could be accepting of Whitman? I mean, can we read it? I'm really trying to read it in a way that is making him not such a jerk.
Yeah,
so
I appreciate that.
Can we try? I'm trying to figure out how to read these last two lines so that we read it that he's not a jerk. Is there a way to give a sympathetic reading?
So does somebody think that Poe says the same? Poe is saying the same thing. Is he saying it better or in a more authentic way, or is it like kind of, I don't know.
I wanted to ask Jeroen that exact question.
I mean, I think at least Poe is giving some sort of explanation, I think, because he's talking about the mythological things and why he thinks that science just makes kind of myth obsolete and kind of focuses on all the reasons and kind of destroys everything in the on the way. Whereas Whitman, I think, there's no real reason to his despise of science in this poem.
You think he's not engaging with the whole science argument at all?
Yeah,
he's just rejecting it whole, right? Yeah. He's not engaging with it.
Yeah.
I agree with that because so I've taught non-university students, and so one of the things you do is you get them interested in something, and then you go and you bring the technical analysis of this. First you show them the thing of wonder, and then you start poking at it and getting more precise. And I think that Whitman, unless it's just that his head was spinning and he couldn't cut it in the astronomy classroom, just completely shuts that down. Whereas Poe seems to understand the process of wanting to be curious and explore.
Yes, that's true.
Well, that's the unaccountable. It was unaccountable. He did go there wanting to explore, Whitman, but then it's unaccountably he became sick and tired, and then he rose and he glided out. So he went out with a lightness because he was a lightweight mentally at this point. And he wandered off by himself, and then time is happening here to him because he's in this mystical moist night air, and it's dark all of a sudden. He's been in a lighted place, and so it becomes mystical, almost mysterious, similar etymologies for those two words. And then he's there going, oh gosh, I got sick, and where's my cold compress, or I want to put the wet blanket back on that lecturer. And then he just happened to look up and went, there's the wonder that Suzanne was trying to teach me in school.
Folks, I need to go. My realtor is calling me. So, okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I think that Whitman was bored in that picture. It was boring. It doesn't really interest him. And when he went outside, he saw these jewels in the sky that Poe is talking about, and that is what made him happy again.
Mark, that is just not very generous to Whitman, that he would be bored.
But I think I agree with Mark, and I think Whitman's entitled to be bored. If he goes in and it's not his thing, then the good thing is to go out and find something that is his thing.
Right, he's not interested in these figures. He's not interested in these explanations. He's happy that the stars are there.
Yeah,
I think that's the point.
I think that the comparison with the Poe is really useful just for drawing out exactly what they're thinking, in part because, just like looking at it a little bit more closely, like Poe, I think I don't think he's too upset about science. I think he acknowledges that it's a fact, and this is what's taking place. I also think that what's interesting, the opposition that Poe sets up is with mythology and science, rather than direct experience. And for Whitman, it's about direct experience. That's what he sets up against science. It's like, science is one thing. I go outside, I can see the stars for myself, and I have my own relationship to them. Whereas Poe is talking about things that are purely literary. It's all secondhand stuff, right? He's talking about, like, Poe probably never sat beneath a tamarind tree, it's more just like the thought of it that's being deprived of him. Poe is not saying, like, Poe doesn't actually really seem to care about looking at the stars. So I think that's an interesting sort of, Poe is sort of stuck in the literary here, stuck in a kind of long classical literary tradition. And he's not stuck, but that's what he's invoking, right, as the sort of the counterweight to science. And what science does is it gradually, that's the whole like Enlightenment project, like it gradually like sheds a light or provides a rational explanation for everything that was once considered to be mysterious. and he's just for him it's more like, oh, the literature just isn't going to be the same anymore, but maybe we'll find something to do. Whereas for Whitman it's really like, he's more, it's about experience, it's about categories of experience, and how he seems to think that science is actually, even though science can be very experiential because it's a lot of it's about empirical observation, for him it's he's sort of quibbling about observation, about empiricism, about what it is to see something, behold something, and to sort of extract or produce knowledge from what you see and observe. It's kind of it's a complicated argument, I think, in many ways.
I'm imagining that Whitman went to the lecture because he thought he'd find something interesting. And then it just went on and on and on and on. And he escaped. That's what it feels like to me. It doesn't feel like he went to the lecture just so that he could rubbish it, but that he went to the lecture hopefully, but actually it didn't do anything for him. But I might be wrong. I mean, I have never read anything of Whitman's that I've liked at all, and I did quite like this. He didn't drone on and on and on and on and on about classes of people and things. He took a subject and did something with it.
So you think that he's not rejecting science as a whole, but more like this specific lecture that he went to?
I think he's rejecting the lecture he went to, and perhaps saying it's all very well for them, but it's not for me. And maybe beyond that, it's all very well for them, but it's not for poets.